First of all, thank you so much for joining the Winning Teams series here. We're really excited to share and for our audience to hear the stories about winning teams that you would like to share with us. It's an honor to be able to even have any type of visibility into some of these cases or context that you would like to share here. It's really exciting. As you know, the major motivation for this series is really to uncover what it takes really for teams under high stake situations, not just to win, but really do amazing things. And you bring such an amazing, I think, capacity to to share that, and definitely everybody will be really excited about that. So thank you so much for joining us. There's a hand.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Privileged to be here. Thank you.
Okay, so great. So first of all, if you can share a little bit about your background, your role, just to give a little bit context for the audience.
Sure. So where to start, I guess. So born and raised in California. I am a career Air Force officer, 26 years in the U.S. Air Force. Served in a number of different roles, mostly flying related. Mostly combat search and rescue, so lots of time overseas, lots of contingency operations, lots of opportunities to work with high-performing teams in very high-stress situations. So it's been a great education of sorts to sort of live through those lives and to learn a lot along the way. After I retired out of the Air Force, I went to work in industry, working primarily in the aerospace and defense sector, and again had opportunities to work with high-performing teams doing very specific, very expensive things. Lived through COVID as a program manager running a contract of about 400 folks. Had a lot of challenges with that, obviously, where I had a chance to revisit a number of those contingency leadership strategies and approaches, if you will. And then now I'm in a nonprofit working in the aerospace and defense sectors again, and again having an opportunity to interface with companies and organizations as they begin to address challenges that are emerging now in a really dynamic and changing way.
Such a rich and wide range of experiences, and like you said, very stressful and high-stakes situations that you've led teams through, and really not just saw the high performance, but really drove that capacity to have that impact. And I'm sure there are so many different stories and cases that you can share. And maybe we will start with one case, one winning team, high-performing team under stress that you would like to share, really from the perspective of of the context this team worked at, and what are those qualities that really led the team to such a strong capacity to really win or deliver, execute on the mission, right?
Certainly. So one of the things I really like to think about, and as we've learned here at MIT, I see parallels, of course, is that leadership ultimately is about people. And that sounds kind of ridiculous and a little bit simplistic, but in reality, even the most technical enterprise involves huge relationship dynamics. So high stress, high context operations and situations require a really fundamental understanding of leading yourself and leading others. So a great example, I think, as we discussed previously, would be my experience working as a program manager on a very high pressure contract, and COVID emerged, right? So we were not allowed by contract to pull back our operations, to make any significant changes in terms of our output, our quantity, none of that stuff. It all had to stay exactly the same. We were working for the US government. They are a merciless customer. So we had to find ways to operate as safely as possible in a very high stress situation and a very high pressure situation. That pressure primarily came from not knowing, right? We didn't know a lot about the virus at the time. We didn't know a lot about its transmissibility. We didn't know about its impact. Our contract involved working very closely with people in very confined spaces, so we didn't have the ability to social distance. And in some cases, there was a lot of controversy about masks. And we actually had one of our contract members contracted COVID and died, which hit the team very hard. So throughout all of that, leadership became the essential variable. How you manage through chaos confidently and competently became a huge challenge for us. And that became, in my mind, as the program manager, a collaborative effort. It wasn't going to be one person slapping their hand on the table saying, this is what we're going to do, because there were just too many unknowns. So I relied very heavily on interfaces with my customer, with my executive leaders on my team, with the individual team leaders, to get feedback, recommendations, suggestions. We met every day. We had a specific half-hour block of time that we committed where we had a standardized agenda, and we made clear what our objectives were on the day, the challenges that we faced, the mitigation efforts we were going to do. I mean, it was a very deliberate process to lead ourselves through that. It involved a collaborative effort, as I mentioned, and that's the only way I felt we were going to succeed, is if we had buy-in and participation from all the key stakeholders. Ultimately, we got through it. Our customer was happy. Other than that one person I had mentioned, who was a very good friend of mine, we were successful, I think, in the end, and we were able to continue delivering at a very high quality level despite incredible uncertainty. And it just took a lot of work on our part with respect to just bringing people on board as opposed to being very directive. That was the approach that I took anyway.
Yeah, so leadership under uncertainty and how you cope with
Correct.
sometimes loss and sometimes very difficult situations, and really still keep focused on the mission and, and deliver, execute on the mission.
Execute. So let's contrast that with my experience in combat, which was not a collaborative leadership process, which was extremely hierarchical, where executive level leaders said, this is the way we go and we're going this way. Everybody fall in line. And it was life or death. If you chose to disagree or if you had another opinion, you had to stow that quickly, make your concerns known, but then you had to execute. We didn't have that kind of flexibility under that particular environment. In COVID, we certainly did, and it was a requirement, but there are other circumstances, again, all leadership situational, right? But all about people, and we had to be very careful in combat situations specifically about very strict limits on what leaders were required, how people were expected to act, and what the outcomes were going to be. Very high stress, most high stress I've ever been under, obviously, for obvious reasons. And it took a different leadership style and a different level of commitment from individuals and teams.
What human capabilities or skills come into the play where, like you're saying, the mission is very clear, there is no question about what we need to do, what we're looking to deliver on, and now you really need to build a team, need to build the capability to essentially execute, and it requires lots of skills that are not only technical in nature. Mm-hmm. Of course, it goes without saying there is a technical capability and certain outstanding capacity to actually deliver on that mission from a technical standpoint, but there is the human factor in that.
Sure.
Can you elaborate a little bit about that?
Sure, and let me clarify a point there too. Specifically, if we look at very high stress, high pressure situations, I would imagine an OR would be an example. Certainly combat aviation, in my case, flying at night, and people shooting at you, a lot of things going on, very dynamic, very high stress. You were not in a situation there where you had to be quiet and you just had to do what you were told all the time. It was an imperative for us that if you had information or if you had questions that were going to be of value or relevant to the mission, you had to speak up. It was a requirement. And I worked in very high performing teams, and those teams had such a high level of trust that if they were told to do something incredibly dangerous or potentially ridiculous or stupid, they trusted each other enough to ask smart questions, and they would listen to one another and make informed decisions about how they're going to operate in a very dangerous environment. So building that level of trust, absolutely essential in organizing and operating high-level teams, high-performing teams in particular, and then continuing to develop and hone that trust through those operations, again, absolutely essential if you're going to be successful there.
Such a great focus area of building trust. And
absolutely. My favorite topic in leadership, by the way, trust, the single most important element in effective leadership under high-stress situations. Trust, it's everything.
From talent development standpoint, right? So someone is joining the Air Force or joining the team that is, like you said, high performing team, and they're high stress, high stake situations. How you develop those skills, right? So it seems like you need to get to a certain level of, again, trust, but also those human capabilities, human skills that will make it possible, and it's a process.
Right.
Can you maybe describe a little bit, the best practices that you'll add essentially, to make it happen?
Excellent point. Yeah. So best practices in trust building. I am a believer that trust is granted as opposed to trust being earned. In those situations, if you're showing up on my team, then I'm going to have an initial belief that you're qualified to be on that team. So you have a certain set of skills, and now it's incumbent on me and the rest of the team to bring you on board. So I'm a big believer that trust is something that has to be worked on every day. And those are fundamental skills that leaders need to develop. How you build, how you reinforce, and how you leverage trust to achieve high performance under difficult situations or circumstances. And in my experience, it takes time. So particularly in the military, we had opportunity to work and train for long periods of time, typically before we went downrange. Once we're downrange, things happen very fast. So you have to have built that foundation amongst your team early and reinforced it often, all the time, every day, building levels of trust and understanding that you know what you're doing, you trust me that I know what I'm doing, that we're going to work collaboratively together to get something done, so that when I tell you we're going this way, you trust me and we go that way. There's not a debate about it, and there's not foot dragging, but at the same time, we've built this level of trust, so you're going to be able to engage with me if you have questions, and we'll make a smart decision together as best we can. Always, however, it's in the back of your mind with high-performing teams under stress that it's going to happen where I'm just going to say we're going this way. And we have to have built a relationship at that point, a connection with one another to where you're going to follow me, if that's the case. And that takes time. I've already overstated that, I think, but I can't emphasize it enough that just taking the time and making the effort to build those trust mechanisms is the difference between success and failure. I've seen it repeatedly. I've seen high-performing teams where trust is broken down and bad things happen. So, as I said, trust is the fundamental element.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, and especially in high-stakes environments. I'm also curious to hear a little bit about some of the other, human capabilities that come into the play, right? So we said trust, the ability to ask questions, basically having this psychological safety to be able to feel as a team that we can trust each other and we are ready to go to this mission, although we know that there are some consequences and very serious consequences that can come into the play. How other qualities come into the play, and again, maybe in a different case, so if you would like to share qualities or skills like creativity, innovation,
Sure.
coming up with ideas or with solutions that are outside of the conventions, especially when the stakes are high.
Yeah. One thing I will mention in that vein, before we talk about creativity, is I'd like to talk about communications as a core function of high-performing teams.
Yep.
Their ability to communicate within the team, external to the team, up above the leadership, to subordinates, to peers. But communication is really I found it to be a fascinating thing to study amongst the teams and organizations that I've worked with. Those teams that communicate well, that have a clear, open lines, good things tend to occur from that. Problems are exposed early. Mitigation measures are created that are more effective, deeper, that are more meaningful through good communication lines. You dispense with a lot of formalities sometimes, and you're able to just get to the heart of the matter quicker and easier. Again, a core tenet of high-performing teams that I've been a part of. One of the things that I really love about communications, if done well, obviously, good things happen. If done not well, then some interesting challenges can occur, and I've seen a lot of buffoonery result, which didn't necessarily need to. But I think a fun thing to mention about communications is leaders are often afraid of it, particularly amongst their team. So if a leader has an idea, that we're going to go this way, we're going to do this thing, and the rest of the team not necessarily on board. If there's not really clean lines of communications, then the team member may be like, okay, fine, we'll see what happens, just because I want to see what happens, not because I believe what it's going to do. So I've seen a lot of examples of that, but I really believe anyway that establishing good lines of communication is important. And I've worked with a couple of very high-performing teams overseas in combat in particular, and they are believers that there is a stupid question. Don't ask stupid questions. If there's information you can find out or know, or you should already know, and you're asking questions about it, that concerns me. Right? I'm not confident in your ability to do what you're supposed to be able to do. So,
which sounds like the opposite of what you said before. The ability to ask a question, have this psychological safety,
sure,
as if there is a conflict between these two concepts, right?
Sure. So I'm going to give you psychological safety to have a conversation with me. But if you ask a question that is that demonstrates to me that you don't know what you should know, I'm nervous.
So expertise, right? You were supposed to know this thing,
exactly.
Right? Like why you even come up with this question.
So a high level of individual expectation that all members of the team are going to perform at their best. And every other member of the team is counting on you to do that. And you're counting on every other member of the team to be at their best. And if I have any indication that you're not there, that's going to be a problem for us. So there is such a thing as a stupid question. Don't ask it. Ask good questions, and let's create a safe environment where you can have those conversations. But again, a expectation that everybody is on their A game. That was our phrase in Iraq, was be on your A game every night.
The stakes are high. You need the A game.
Are terminal, right? They're life or death. If you screw it up, we all die. So it's not a good thing.
Yeah. So trust, ask questions when appropriate.
Yep.
Seems like.
Ask good questions.
Good questions. Communication lines.
Yep.
We trust each other. We need to be all the time in total sync.
Yes.
Right. And then it comes, creativity maybe comes into the play, right? Or some other qualities. So I would like to hear a little more.
So let's talk about creativity, right? So I may tell you to go this way. How we get there, I'm going to leave to you. So I will require creative, innovative solutions. And let's think about what creativity is. It's a lot of ways to describe it, but it's really in a lot of cases synthesizing two different things to create something new. So relying on your experience, your skills, and your perspective to come up with an innovative or a different approach to accomplishing a task I need done. So the most effective teams I've seen were the ones that set an objective and then let the experts figure out how to get there as much as possible. Now, there are interdependencies you have to be aware of. If we're going to put a team on top of a roof of a building, I can't just say, do whatever you want. They have to follow some rules. For a number of reasons, but within those confines, great leaders are going to set left and rights. These are the limits of where you go, operate in between as you need to get the job done. And then teams take off. Creativity flows, amazing innovative approaches occur, things I didn't even think of, will materialize, and again, success becomes more probable in that case.
But research on creativity actually suggests that constraints, they are the fuel. They encourage creativity. They provide, because when you don't have those constraints, so clear goal, right? So you might be able to come up with novel ideas, but it will not deliver on the value. There's the value is not there. Originality is not yet to suggest that there is a value to these outputs. Like you were saying, there is the expectation what we are trying to achieve. Goal, very clear goal, and certain constraints that will drive that creative or novel approach. Other examples from your experience, again, whether it's Air Force or other experiences that can bring it to life. That when a team or team member was able to come up with creative solution ideas, something that actually led to success of the mission, and without having that outside of the box thinking, it would have been maybe more difficult to get there.
Yes, great story for that. So we had received funding to purchase a new simulator for training helicopter aircrew. And my program managers were given the responsibility to design this new simulator system, but that was it. They weren't told how big it had to be. They weren't told anything other than we want to train people in this device. So they created this system to put the entire helicopter crew on one simulator platform. So everybody would train together, not just the pilots by themselves, but everybody in the back end as well. Absolutely revolutionary concept. No one had ever done this before anywhere. And once they did, it just fired off this whole line of thinking. Well, if we put everybody together to train together, what tasks can we train? How can we train it? How well can we train it? And that process of discovery, of saying, you need to build a new thing, how you get there is really up to you to sort of shape it. That just inspired this brilliant line of thinking from the team. And when they had the freedom and the flexibility to think without constraints, they were, the constraint was you have to deliver it by this date. It can't be any more expensive or bigger than these figures. But within that space, they were allowed to freely think and create. They delivered something amazing. Absolutely amazing. It's still state of the art. It's 15 years later, right? But it was really a great example, I think, of what happens when you provide constraints to a team, but then you unchain them to operate within that space. And the results were magic, just magic.
Amazing example. So creativity leads to the ultimate outcome that with a lasting impact for years, like
sure,
you're saying,
absolutely.
Reshaping the way we think about the simulation.
Absolutely. So it reshaped the way we operated as an organization. So allowing people the flexibility to kind of do something just spiraled off this whole line of questioning and thinking within the team that allowed them to affect other things, other devices, how we ran our syllabus. I mean, there were just a number of other externalities that were affected as a result of this one creative experience. So aligning a team on a singular vision, giving them whatever left and right you need and letting them go, it just can cascade into a number of other things. Just really great outcomes for us.
Amazing. Of course, the ability to be able to identify those skills, those qualities in people when we do hiring or when we promote people on the team, right? This is part of this equation, how we can actually identify, sense that there is something there in this team member, in this person that makes me as a leader think that there is high potential path for this person, and it's because he or she is able to build trust, in such a just incredible way, encourage others and also come up with the right questions and come up with creative solutions, right? Maybe not all of these qualities in one person, but you want to be able to sense that. So to what extent in your line of work now or before, this was the consideration when you hire people, you promote people on the team to really achieve this high-performing capacity on the team? Right.
High-performing teams evaluate and promote differently than other teams. That's been my experience anyway, because they value different things. Relationships, personal dynamics, some of those characteristics you mentioned about creativity, critical thinking, dynamic problem solving, trust. I mean, how do you evaluate that? Are those things that you capture on someone's annual performance? And if so, how? What measures do you use? What standards do you evaluate against? High-performing teams know those things. They can identify answers to those questions, and those are the capabilities that they most value in those people they advance, because those are the things that they want to continue to grow and develop within their teams. It's not about how much revenue did you bring in, or how many doors did you blow up, or whatever the traditional metric of success is, right? These are human focused skills that we often find very difficult to kind of quantify. We can qualify them, but then how do you measure them effectively so that you can identify those folks that have them, and for those folks that don't, how do you enhance them and build them?
This is great overview, and both on the hiring side and the talent development, how those skills play such a significant role. And of course, in this program, in the Executive MBA program here in MIT, we have very significant lessons that we all experience. But again, each EMBA student brings so much into the play, and of course, just from this brief conversation, you're giving so many of those examples. If you would like to speak a little bit about your experience in the program and how it really intersects with some of those best practices and the major qualities that you see that really make the difference for high-performing teams operating in very stressful, very high-stakes situations?
Sadly, I have a fair amount of experience as well working with teams that are not as organized or aligned to value or evaluate these things we've just been talking about, sort of the human side of leadership. They've been quite good at evaluating revenue, at evaluating profitability, or any number of fiscal terms that they look at as quality discriminators amongst their people and how they intend to develop them. And those folks struggle. They struggle to acquire the talent that they want in the specific skills that they're looking for, and they also struggle in retaining them because they commoditize them, right? And those things can be disposed of, and human beings are just basically numbers on a balance sheet, if you will. Balance sheet may not be the right word based on what we learned today.
The head count.
Head count, there we go, yes sir. So I'm a believer in my experience, N equals 1, limited exposure obviously, but in my experience, those organizations that value people as critical elements of success, not merely as cost centers or as quantities to be adjusted in times of fiscal uncertainty, but really look to the strength of the creativity, the creative thinking, the critical problem solving, those types of skills. As they evaluate and find those people, hire them, retain them, and focus on them. Those are the ones I think that have performed the best in my experience. Those organizations that value those human dynamics are really the ones that are successful. And I've loved how MIT has captured that in several of the courses that we've had so far. I'm hoping they continue it. Really a focus on human dynamics as an important part of corporate success. It's more than a balance sheet in my mind. I might be naive in my assumption, but I'm a big believer that people make it work. People are the engine of success, and they're not to be traded lightly.
Yeah.
If you've invested wisely in them.
Exactly. If you hire the right people and best fit people, but then when you build,
continue training them. You
yep.
continue challenging them. You give them those constraints and those BHAGs, if you will. Those audacious goals, and then continue to fuel and inspire them. Then they will be the engine of success. They will be the disruptors in the industry that we're looking for.
But the insight you just shared about the high-performing team, the winning teams, that what differentiates, what the big difference for those teams is not just the high performance, but also their ability to identify those skills and to identify what are those principles that they like operating principles. So frame of reference is not only about the technical side of the work, it's really about how we work as humans as part of that team, and how we make sure that we have the right human skill set to really create that such a significant value or significant capacity to deliver on the mission.
Absolutely.
In our introduction conversation, you mentioned again, if you would like to share about the emergency during the Katrina crisis. Yeah, if you'd like to share maybe how also some of those human qualities come into the play, or anything else you would like to share here.
And we talked about this from the perspective of operating effectively in a chaotic situation or a chaotic environment. In fact, operating well in a chaotic environment. So 2005, Hurricane Katrina flooded New Orleans, 100,000 people trapped in the city. My squadron was called on to do relief operations there. For 3 straight weeks, we flew helicopters in and out of New Orleans 12 hours a day. That was the maximum we could fly by regulation, and we even got extensions beyond that sometimes. So there were, by some estimates, as many as 200 helicopters flying in and around the city, hauling sandbags, moving people around. We flew dogs and crutches and wheelchairs, all kind of stuff. Just it was madness. There was no central control over that city. There was no common radio frequency other than emergency frequencies, and there were civilian news helicopters, and there were military. I mean, it was a free-for-all. It was just an insane, crazy place to be. Never seen anything like it. We never trained for situations like that because it's inconceivable. We had well-meaning crews fly helicopters there to try to help people that had crashed, and there were helicopters littered all over that city. I've got pictures of them still. We used them for landmarks, for crying out loud, because they were very easy to identify. The crashed helicopter on 4th and Main, you know. So we were really challenged at that point to find ways to operate safely yet effectively in a very chaotic, completely unimaginable situation. Not trained to work in a situation like that, but we had to find ways to do that. And the way we did that is we started with basic fundamentals. And for us, basic fundamentals is, can you do your job effectively? We were all trained. In fact, we were in a spin-up to go back to Afghanistan when Hurricane Katrina hit. So we had already done the basic foundational work to prepare as crews to operate in a combat environment, but we could overlay that into a contingency like New Orleans pretty easily. We realized that one of the fundamental skills we had to be perfect at, we could not afford any deviation from, was communications. We had to be able to talk effectively with ourselves, with our teammates, with other aircraft. Communication was going to be essential so that we wouldn't make careless mistakes, or we could communicate things that we thought, when the risk level was getting too high because we were doing something dangerous, we could say something immediately and make changes or modifications. So a foundation of being prepared with basic skills and capabilities, an acknowledgement up front that communications was going to be absolutely something we would not accept any deviation from, and then we built plans that were inherently flexible. So we were going to operate in certain areas, and we made ways to deconflict from one another so we wouldn't run into each other. We made altitude separation rules so that transiting in and out of the city, we could do that as safely as possible. We created air refueling routes with our air refueling partners to make sure that we always had fuel to continue doing the mission. And we always stayed really tight on the radio. That was our communication method, primarily to other aircraft. But throughout 3 weeks of operating at an incredibly high pace, we were able to do it very safely, or at least as safely as possible. I mean, it was an inherently unsafe environment, but we had no mishaps, none. We didn't break any airplanes, we didn't kill anybody, we didn't damage any equipment. We flew those airplanes to the limits of their capabilities every single day, extensively, and the limits of ourselves as crews extensively. Because we had all of those foundational elements ready, because we had a disciplined set of plans and operating guidelines that we were going to adhere to, and we just stayed on each other as best we could to make sure that if we're getting tired, we would communicate. If we saw something we didn't like, we'd communicate. And eventually it all kind of came together for us, and I think by the end of it, we tallied it actually, and we had over 30,000 people we pulled out of that city. Wow. 30,000 people out of these little tiny Black Hawk helicopters. It was astonishing. We're super proud of the organization for doing that.
Incredible. Thank you so much for sharing the story, and again highlighting the importance of this, knowing the mission and having, I think you introduced the concept of disciplined communication.
Yes, very
Here in Sloan, there's a disciplined leadership and innovation, disciplined communication, especially in high-stakes situations.
Essential, right?
Essential.
In any context, right? Military, civilian, academic, it doesn't matter. Disciplined communications really, it is a way to separate the uncertainty from some certainty, I think, and it allows you to identify risk, as I mentioned, and find ways to overcome it.
Such an incredible story and example, to bring to life this concept of disciplined communication.
Can I give you a story? Because I think it's funny. It's interesting. We were flying around the city, and we saw a boat floating through downtown New Orleans, waving furiously at us. They had pulled a guy out of a building who had been stuck in this building for days. He was dehydrated. He had all kind of medical problems, and they needed to get him to a hospital quickly, but they didn't know where they were because, there are no road signs. They're all underwater. You're just floating along in this underwater city. So we had to find a way to get this guy, and I needed to land to get him on board the helicopter. The only place we could find to land was a freeway overpass, which came out of the water and went back into the water. And it was big enough for us to land on. I didn't know if it was stressed to hold a 19,000-pound helicopter or not, so we were a little nervous. So through some really strange hand signals, communications, right, we told the boat to go over to this bridge, and then we very carefully landed on it and sent our medics down there to get this guy, bring him aboard, and fly away. Now, that to me is one of the stupidest things you could ever imagine doing in a helicopter, but it was essential. It was life or death for this guy. So we had to rely on some basic communication skills inside of our airplane, coming up with a plan, discussing our concerns, deciding how we're going to operate, and then making sure everybody knew if something went a little awry or if we got concerned, speak up immediately so we could adjust our plan. Got on the bridge, got the guy aboard, talking to everybody we could to say we're going straight to the hospital, get the hospital prepped, and deliver him. So that's a long story, but it illustrates so many of those points we've been talking about. And I think that those are transferable points in any context. You know, solid foundation of what you're doing, great communications plan, commitment to operate as effectively and safely as possible, a plan to overcome challenges if they arise, even the ones you don't even know about. You got a plan to at least discuss and engage on it, and then execute with conviction.
Incredible story again, and such.
I have pictures too.
Yeah.
My gunner took pictures as we did that.
Yeah, it's you know, hearing you sharing this story, it's almost in my view it was almost I can picture, you know, and but of course, you know, you were there, so it's incredible what you and the team did there, and of course. You're saying it's not only high stress, high stakes, but also high risk situation for the team. So there is a safety concern, like making sure that, you know, we are safe, so we can actually help other people, and you know how you do that, and adaptations you need to do along the way to make sure that you are not just, you know, going with the plan, but the conditions are changing on you. You need to be dynamic and adaptive.
Right. So interesting too in that story, the evidence of organizations and teams that did not follow that process was right in front of us. There is a crashed helicopter on the ground, which there's nobody to move it. It's going to be there for several weeks, and they did not. Something failed in their internal process, and that was the result. It was visceral. It was right in front of you that we don't want to be that guy. So let's make sure we're as smart, we're as able, we're communicating well. You know, all of those foundational things. Let's do all of that so we can avoid being that guy. It was right in our face.
Vivid example. So, and back to what you were saying in our classes. So in the organizational processes class with Roberto Fernandez, when we were discussing this, like symbols. So this is almost the landmark, the symbol. Look, this what will happen if we are not going to do this right.
Terrible symbol, but a great illustration of it. Yes.
Yeah. This is great. Thank you so much for sharing all these stories and making it so vivid. So, you know, bring this to life. If you know, we have young leaders or leaders that go through certain you know, development of the leadership skills. You know, watching this interview. I think you gave so many advices already, you know, throughout the interview. Anything that you would like to highlight as, you know, as someone who is looking to lead high-performing, winning teams that can have lasting, you know, impact, consistent in high performance. You know, what are those, you know, key qualities? What are the things you really need to keep in mind and really act on that?
I found in the military in particular that there's a high level of emphasis on technical skills training. We spend a huge amount of time making sure that people are technically proficient. And I don't think in many cases that we spend enough time on some of those human dynamics. Now, full bias admitted as an airman, I think the Air Force does actually a really good job. I'm not sure about the other military services, but I can just say that I learned how important human dynamics are from my time and training in the Air Force. And I brought that out into the civilian world as a retiree, and I have seen countless times how important those human dynamics are. Clearly, I will admit that you need to be a technical expert in whatever discipline you pursue. But if you're going to lead others, which begins with leading yourself, obviously, then you have to have an understanding and appreciation for how important those human dynamics are. And then you need training and lots of practice on exercising great leadership at the human level. There's only so far you're going to get in life by telling someone to go this way. There are so many other components of getting them there that you really have to sort of get good at, right? And that's the human side of leadership. And that, to me, my experience in a number of different situations, both highly technical and less highly technical, the human dynamic is what makes the difference.
Such a great summary for
here at
people
here at MIT, the School of Technology, right?
It's great. anything else that we haven't touched on you wanted to to highlight for folks?
Let me take a look here. I don't think so. Oh yeah, I'll say this. If I have opportunity to speak to young leaders, I will give them the same advice that I gave my daughter throughout her high school experience. I drove her to school every day, and every day she got out of the car, I told her the same three things. I said, think big thoughts, ask lots of questions, and have fun. If you're doing those three things, you're on your way to success. And if you are encouraging others around you, those you lead in this case, to think big thoughts, ask lots of questions, and have fun at what you're doing, you're headed in the right direction.
Wow. Such a great advice.
She still laughs at me today about that, but I tell her that when I'm on the phone with her at least once or twice a week. I tell her the same thing.
Remember, these are the three things.
The three things, man. These are the keys to life that will make you successful, both as a person and I think as a leader too. You have to be curious as a leader, obviously. Everyone knows that. But I really encourage people to keep that at forefront. Ask lots of questions.
Yeah. This is great. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for such an amazing interview.